Well, good evening, everybody. We will go ahead and get started. I'm so glad to have everyone hop on and join us this evening. I will post again the webpage where you can find the PDF of the slides for this evening's webinar. And you can kind of follow along if you want to print them off at home and take notes, or totally just sit back and soak it all in. It's whatever you choose to do. My name is Amy Solik. I am a 4-H Youth Development Specialist for the Southwest region. So I'm located, I kind of float between an office in Garden City and out of my home in Kinsley. But I'm a lifelong 4-H'er and moved to Kansas, gosh, almost 20 years ago now, and have been extension ever since right out of college. And I'm thrilled to be with you this evening. We've had a lot of retirements in the last couple years, and I inherited the Foods Project after Diane Mack, a very beloved, long tenured 4-H specialist, and I was thrilled to get it because 4-H Foods, I have very dear memories of growing up in 4-H. The Foods Project was by far my favorite, and I have fantastic memories of my foods leader and all the skills that I learned in the 4-H Foods Project. So I'm tickled to be here with you tonight. I do have a team of folks that are helping with the webinar series, and I'd like to quickly introduce them. Linda Beach is a retired extension agent, but someone that has worked very closely with the 4-H Foods Project and has judged numerous things over the years. She's quite a bit of an expert. So thank you, Linda, for hopping on. Linda's going to help kind of monitor the chat box. So if you've got questions throughout the evening, she might be one to answer. Karen Blakesley is with our Rapid Response Center. She is the guru and expert of all things foods and nutrition. We use Karen as our, like I said, our expert in our state for all kinds of questions about nutrition and content and recipes. She's our gal. So thank you so much for hopping on. She is going to present a majority of the information on weeks 2 and 3 as far as foods and nutrition and foods preservation. So welcome, Karen. We've got Nancy Honig, who is joining us from the Wild West District in Stevens County out in Hugoton, Kansas. Nancy's been an agent for a very long time and has had a lot of experience with both the 4-H program and the Foods Project. So she's also going to help monitor the chat box. And we've got Ashley Spotty. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I've actually never stopped long enough to ask you. She's from the Northwest. She's an extension specialist in family and consumer sciences. She's also going to help kind of monitor that chat box as well. We aren't going to pause for questions throughout the presentation because we have so much to get through. But if you would utilize that chat box, submit questions along the way, and we'll do our best to answer as we go in the chat box, and I can certainly try to catch up and address some things at the very end as well. Karen, do you have any words to say before we get started?
Well, hi, everybody. I'm thrilled that all of you are joining, and I enjoyed reading through the chat box that we got some new ones, and we've got some that have done this before. We got some foods leaders. That's great. This is great information if you're just a foods leader or if you got 4-H'ers on here too. So we welcome all of you. I noticed somebody said something about, are we tasting anything? Sorry. I wish we had smell-o-vision or something like that, but we don't. So that's the one downside of doing a training like in this format, is especially for this topic, is that we can't taste anything. So, but the next 2 weeks, I hope you will come back and join me with the information that I have planned to present. And there'll be some action and some interaction that you guys get to work with me on. So, so please come back, and thanks for coming tonight.
Yeah, well said. Well, tonight's webinar will focus primarily on the exhibit, the project exhibit judging process, and what you need to know going in when you sit down with a 4-H'er and you've got their food item in front of you. And much of what I'm going to say can be related to any 4-H project. Obviously, tonight I'll be using foods examples. But this is pretty standard across all projects, even livestock in many cases. Hopefully, by the end of tonight, you will understand your role as a judge and how you can create the positive learning experience for our young people. We want you to understand that the young person and the educational experience is more important than the exhibit itself. And we hope you really learn and become familiar and comfortable with the ribbon system that we refer to as the Danish ribbon system. So when you think and stop and think about a project exhibit, right? A young person enrolls in a 4-H project at the beginning of the 4-H year in the fall. So October, November, December, a young person decides, you know what, I'm really interested in cooking and baking and nutrition, and I'm going to sign up for the foods project. The project exhibit that you see at the fair is the best of what they've learned throughout an entire year's worth of project experiences. They will have had successes along the way. They will have had mistakes and failures. We hope they try lots of different recipes, and what they're bringing to you at the fair is the best of what they've learned. So, you know, when you sit down with them, we hope that they are able to express and articulate what they've learned, what they faced in terms of challenges, any mishaps, a new skill. But we're trying to reinforce what we refer to in 4-H youth development as project mastery. We want them to gain a little bit more knowledge, a little bit more skill with each year that they're enrolled. Okay, that also encourages a growth mindset, right? It wouldn't be appropriate for a high school student who's been in foods for 7 years to make a snack mix. Right, we would expect more advanced item. We'd expect more skill. You know, we want them to be on a stair step, or what we call in education, that growth mindset. The project exhibit is being evaluated against a standard, and we'll cover this a little bit more in a few more slides, but we're not comparing it to the last cake or pie that came to the table. We're comparing it to a benchmark or a set of standards that we outlined. And like I said, we'll get into that a little bit more when we talk about rubrics. And we want to give the young person an opportunity to share what they want to share, right? You can learn so much from a young person by asking some prompting questions. It's almost as important as the food skills that they learned in making said item, right? We want them to be able to talk to you. You are a stranger in many cases, and for them to be able to express and share what they learned, what they enjoyed, what they tried, what didn't work, is really an important part of that project exhibit process. So what's your role as a judge at the fair? Okay, you're part of the team for this larger project learning experience. Okay, so there's lots of people that play a role in that large experience, and you are just as important as the local project leader. You're as important as maybe the extension agent or the parent that has been working with them. All these different people are important components to the larger process. And you're that link that helps them tie it all together, from the plate of cookies or the muffins in front of you towards that larger goal that we're working towards. And your role is to be consistent constructive, objective, and kind. If I had to sum up 4 words, those would be it. And I change those a little bit from year to year as I learn a little bit more and get a little experience under my belt. But it's really important to be consistent. Every time a child sits down across the table from you, you want to have a consistent approach. Constructive, right? You want to provide encouraging feedback, but also challenge them. What could they do better? You want to be objective, right? In many cases, in small towns, you may know some of the kids that sit down across from you, right? So you want to be able to look at that young person and what they bring to the table objectively. And obviously, we want to be kind. These are young people. Many times they are very intimidated by the process, especially our younger ones, our newer ones. And it takes a lot of bravery and a lot of guts to sit down and talk to a stranger. And so obviously kindness goes a long way. So when we sit down, the importance is to focus on the young person. Obviously, we have an item or an exhibit to evaluate, but we're really there for the young person. And youth development is the reason behind the exhibit. So, whether it's a yeast bread in front of you, or a bench that they made in woodworking, or a rocket that they've built in aerospace, the project exhibit is just the vehicle that gets them to the youth development aspect. So again, we're focusing on the young person. What we're evaluating, however, is the exhibit, not the child, right? So many kids will sit down, they all have different backgrounds, they all come from different circumstances, and we don't really know them based on the 5 minutes that we sit down with them. It's a tall order to sit down and quickly evaluate what each young person is capable of. And that's really who they're competing against, per se. They're challenging themselves on their own abilities, not being compared to another young person. And again, the exhibit is an illustration of the young person's achievements towards their project goals. When I sit down with a young person and I'm judging their project exhibit, I usually do ask what their goals were at the beginning of the year. I want them to understand that it's part of this bigger process. When we ask them to write goals in their project records, I'm hoping that they can, number one, tell me what those goals were, and number two, tell me if they've met a couple of them while also learning to make this item, okay? I'll keep rolling. Here's some more logistical things. Prior to the judging day, here's what you can kind of expect, or if you've not judged before, and I saw several of you are newer or interested in judging for the first time. Here's what you can do prior to the judging day to help it be a success. Obviously, you want to know what you're evaluating, and that obviously sounds kind of obvious, but are you judging foods and nutrition? Are you judging foods preservation? You could even find out so much. Are you judging beginners? Are you judging intermediates? Are you judging yeast spreads, or are you judging cookies? A lot of times extension agents or fair boards could tell you some of those specifics. So you kind of have a better idea of what to expect. They will give you usually a letter full of information, but where is the judging taking place? How long is it going to take you to get there? What's parking look like? Every fair is a little bit different in those respects. Prepare the tools that you'll need. Foods judges come with a different set of tools than what a rocketry judge or a woodworking judge would need. So do you need a cutting board? Do you need a towel? Do you need a knife? What are those things that you need to bring? For the most part, across the state, we all use the same scorecards. there are instances where a county, for whatever reason, is still using something different maybe than the next. They should provide you with that. If they don't ahead of time, I would strongly encourage you to request a copy of the score sheet so that you can see exactly what those standards are that you'll be evaluating on. And they also should provide you with either an entire copy of a fair book or the section of foods or foods preservation that you're judging, so that you know what the rules are ahead of time. If you have a chance to review those and read them, it'll, much less confusion on the day of. On the day of, when you arrive, there's a couple things that they should go over with you. If they don't go over it, these are things I would ask. So I would ask about ribbons and trophies and other specific awards. I don't think I've been to a county where they do it exactly the same as anybody else. There's always a slight variation on how they do that. Break times. If you need a break, by all means, either ask for it or just take it. That's totally reasonable, especially in the heat of summer. If you're in a fair building, or, where it's not air conditioned or what have you, take those breaks. Also, it's completely reasonable to understand the payment process. Who do you need to turn in your mileage, what to expect in terms of a judging fee. Will you take a check home with you on that day, or will they mail it to you afterwards? So those would be some questions to ask if they haven't already told you. Most locations will go over all of this in some type of judge's orientation. But again, just an idea of what you can expect. So I told you we'd talk about standards. And, standards are typically derived from research. We are big on them in 4-H, right? It's a way to stay consistent from item to item, from kid to kid. We're using the same benchmarks, those same standards across all exhibits. And the standards is what is spelled out and what's used on the score sheet or the judging rubric. The appropriate ribbon should be awarded to the exhibitor based on the evaluation, based on the standards. The standards aren't changed because of problems or mishaps that arrive, right? So what's a good example? So weather, I'm thinking foods, I'm thinking angel food cakes or chiffon cakes, where things are affected by temperature. We're not adjusting the score sheet. The standards stay the same, right? We're holding the young people to the same set of standards despite the circumstances changing. I'm sure there are other examples, and not to put you on the spot, Karen, can you think of another one that would, there's probably some for foods preservation, I would imagine.
Well, even travel mishaps, getting the item to the fair. You judge what's put in front of you. You can't really do much about that, and I know there's a story to tell, but you judge what you see. So that's one of them that I can think of.
Very true, very true. Okay, so in terms of the process, when the young person sits down with you in the 4-H world, most places you go will utilize what we refer to as a consultative or conference style judging process, where the young person sits down with you across from the table with their item. And you have the opportunity to engage in a conversation with them, okay? You'll be given a score sheet. There's usually an entry tag of some kind. Superintendents are usually, bustling around trying to keep things organized. When the young person sits down with you, it's really helpful to be warm and friendly and kind of guide that conversation. And we will get to that in a little more detail here in just a second. In addition to the conversation that you have with the young person, it's important to take the time to also give written feedback. And I say this for many reasons. Educationally, it's just a sound practice to provide both verbal and written feedback. The written feedback can reinforce what you have verbally told them. In many cases, parents, they have multiple children and they can't always be everywhere at once. So it also helps the adult or even a project leader in some cases learn from the judge what they're looking for and what they might do differently next year. So again, that written piece of feedback is really important. When you sit down, I actually like when you can sit down next to the young person, and I've got two different examples. So in this photo, the 4-H'er sitting across the table, and when you've got a really young 4-H'er and they're quiet, it's hard to hear in a busy, loud fair building, and this side-by-side thing can be a little bit, it's helpful to reduce some of those intimidations across the table. You can certainly ask your superintendent if it's not set up that way and you prefer to sit side by side. You can certainly ask to rearrange the table before you get started for the day to do that. Introduce yourself, ask the member who they are. I always ask what grade they're in and how many years they've been in the project to give me some quick idea of how young they are and what's their level of experience. A smile can go a really long way at putting them at ease and making them feel comfortable. I usually focus on the conversation and I write a lot of comments afterwards. It's a better use of time, and it's not quite as awkward while they're sitting there waiting for you to write things. And the sandwich method, and I've got an entire slide on the sandwich method. You might be wondering what that is. But when you have the conversation with the 4-H'er, I usually start with two positives. So I point out, the aroma or the smell of these cookies is so good and yummy, and it makes me want to take a bite. And, the color is even, it's nice and brown on all sides. And then you'll discuss one, constructive suggestion for improvement and say, the middle isn't quite done, or, maybe there's not enough uneven frosting. I don't know. I'm pulling straws. I don't normally judge foods. But you put that middle constructive suggestion in the middle, and then you sandwich it on the back end with another positive. The texture looks fantastic. So again, two positives, one way to improve, and end on a positive note again. And that's what they call the sandwich. I've heard people refer to it as the Oreo method as well. So, two positives with that suggestion in the middle. And it's okay. I think it's really important to the educational process. They want feedback. And so as long as we give either criticism or constructive improvements, what have you, as long as we give it in a kind and encouraging way, it's totally okay to do that. I would say that even as a parent or as an extension agent, as a project leader, there's nothing more frustrating when all they hear are glowing remarks and then or the score sheet comes back with great, excellent, great, and it doesn't give you any way to do better, right? We want to set them up, like I said, for that growth mindset or that, challenging. We want them to gain a little with each year. So go ahead and give them that constructive feedback. Some suggestions for positive comments. Any number one of these is more than appropriate. I like how you incorporated X, Y, and Z. I can tell you really enjoyed this because you should really feel proud because this is a really complicated skill and you did a great job at your age. There's a number of ways to say things, but once you get rolling, you'll get more comfortable with the process. suggested, these are the harder ones, right? It's always a little harder to point out things that you could be improved upon. I use the first one a lot. Next year you might consider, or you might try, and then tell them what they might do better. It would be helpful if, it may be helpful to practice this quick bread a few more times before so encourage the things that they need to do to meet the standards better, right? It's not an easy task, right? We are asking you to very quickly kind of observe and assess the abilities of a young person in a matter of 5 minutes. So their age, how comfortable they are with you, the years of experience, and the skill that's in front of them. Is this child capable of doing more? And so you very quickly need to kind of assess that and make a judgment call on that. But, again, provide those very kind and constructive comments. I'm going to pause for questions. We're about halfway through my slides. Is there anything in the chat box that, no? Okay. All right, we'll keep going. Okay, here are some suggested questions to ask. Sometimes it can feel like it's pulling teeth to get a young person to have a real good conversation. So try to avoid yes and no questions, because you will just get yes or no. And you really want them to elaborate and really start giving you some good conversation. So one thing you can say is, tell me about how you selected this particular exhibit to compete at the fair, right? So what made them pick a recipe? What made them choose a quick bread over cookies or muffins, right? What was their favorite part of the process? What's the most important thing you learned? Was there a new skill that you tried? So, there's lots of different questions you can ask to prompt them to get to tell you a little bit more. One question I always like to ask is, what was most difficult, or what was the biggest challenge with this recipe or learning a new skill? And they almost always tell you about some big flop or some big mishap, and it kind of breaks the ice and you can get a good chuckle out of it. Okay. So again, don't ask the yes or no, ask prompting questions that'll really start to get them talking. What's the parent role? and this can, I've seen it all at this point. Or just when I think I've seen it all, I'm surprised by something. But this judging process is between you and the young person. Okay. It's not you and the parent. Even the shyest kid can get overshadowed by their parent. So it is totally reasonable to ask the parent, to sit back or allow the young person to be responsible for their exhibit. And hopefully you don't, as the judge, need to say that. Superintendent should also help kind of control some of that. Totally okay for parents to sit and observe from a distance where they can hear. But again, they don't need to be answering for the young person. Written comments and markings, again, super important for the parent. So if you've got, hold on just a second. Sorry, the kids came in. So written comments, written feedback are really important for the parents so that they feel a part of the process and they're getting the information that they need to help their child, but they're not tempted to sit in so close that they start taking over the conversation. Okay, this is one of my favorite slides. I can get on a soapbox on this issue, but award the ribbon that is earned. Okay, I think it's we often get trapped in trying to make the young person feel good or trying to make them not discouraged. And so we're just tempted to give all blues or all purples. We get really over generous, but we really need to sit back and award the ribbon that it merits. Okay. In 4-H, we use what we call the Danish system, and every exhibit will receive a ribbon of some kind. Exhibits are judged again against those standards, not to each other. And exhibits are placed into 4 different ribbon groups: purples, blues, reds, or whites. Some places will use the modified Danish system, which is similar but kind of tweaked. And most frequently, you'll see this in the livestock ring. So exhibits still follow the Danish system, and that they get a red, a white, a blue, a red, a blue, or a purple, but then they're also ranked. So you might have, so if there's 7 head in a class, the top 2 get purples. I have a first and a second, and then 3, 4, and 5 are blues. 6 and 7 are reds. Okay, that's what we call a modified Danish system. The American system is what's most frequently used in the open class. That not every exhibit or item will receive a ribbon, and it's purely ranked: first, second, third, fourth. Most open classes, it varies, but a lot of times they'll go through 6 placings. So there'll be, let's see, a blue, a red, a white is usually first, second, and third. There's a pink and a green and a yellow maybe for first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. And the exhibits or the items are compared to each other. So it is a ranking order. So these muffins are better than these muffins are better than these muffins. And nobody's getting the same color ribbon. Let me back up for that. Some fairs, and this would be actually a question, I'll need to add that to the slide. On the day of judging or ahead of time, find out if you are judging both 4-H and open class. Many of your smaller fairs will only hire 1 judge for both. It just doesn't they don't have the numbers to hire separate judges, but you definitely want to know what you're doing. And in most cases, you'll judge 4-H first because the kids are signing up for those consultative judging times, and then you do open class afterwards. It could be flip-flopped, but that'd be a good question to know ahead of time. Here's a little closer look at the Danish system in 4-H. So the purple is outstanding on all standards. So when you look on that standard score sheet, everything is out in the outstanding column. That item gets a purple. And if everything meets the minimum standard, everything's in the good column. There might even be something where an improvement could be made. That's a blue. If it meets minimum standards, but there are, a couple different, several signs of improvements could be needed, then that's where we're looking at a red. If it fails to meet the minimum standards, we give a white. Okay. The ribbon system actually begins at the red level. Okay. So, if you have a plate, I'll just say cookies. It meets all the minimum standards, but they could be a little more done. They could be more even in size, and I don't know what another factor would be, but that might be deserving of a red. I think over time, we've suffered ribbon inflation, where all of a sudden it feels terrible to give a child or a young person a red ribbon. And really, that's not at all what that means. In fact, when I was a 4-H'er, the purple category didn't exist unless you were named a champion. It was just blues, reds, and whites. Some states still follow that. So, I'm all for giving out a purple if it really is outstanding on all standards. By all means, give the purple. But if there's a couple things where there could be some improvements, and and otherwise is a minimum standard, then ask yourself, is it really a blue? Is it a red? And don't feel bad for giving a blue or a red. Okay. Karen, do you have anything to add on that? I can see you nodding.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. You know, it does take some practice to kind of get a feel of what ribbon should be the right one for the other one. And I'll also say, back on the American system for open class, I always ask, or at least I try to remember to ask when judging open class, if you have to give a blue, red, and white, you know, a first, second, or third. There's many times I do not give a first place ribbon because I don't think it deserves to be any. I don't think any of the exhibits in that class deserve a first place ribbon. And so make sure you get that clarified before you start judging on the American system for open class, because you want to, you know, you want to be cognizant of that. I know I judged at one fair one year, and the superintendent, I asked about it beforehand, but then the superintendent came up afterwards, actually, I was in the middle of judging it, and she wasn't happy with me because I wasn't giving out very many first place ribbons. And this was food preservation. I'll qualify that. And I said, well, I'm not going to reward somebody for something that I see as unsafe. So they have not asked me back, and that's okay. But just make sure you know, ask about that. You know, if they say yes, you have to give a first, second, third, or whatever, then that's, you need to work with that. So but there's many cases where in open class there may only be one exhibit too, so it may not deserve a first place ribbon either. So anyway, but yeah, you know, in the Danish ribbon system, you know, something that gets a white, it's going to be pretty bad. Like if something's not done, or it's soggy in the middle or something like that, or if a pie crust is soggy, or you know, the pie filling is running all over the place and not holding together, you'll kind of get a feel of what really deserves a white or a red after a while. And like Amy said, you need to spread the love, and don't be afraid to do that. And quite honestly, as many years as I've been doing this, the kids understand that, and they usually know that's probably the ribbon they're going to get. If it's a red or a white, they usually get it. And but the thing you have to do is explain, give them the reasons why, and so that they understand. This is your chance to put on your educator hat. So I'll stop talking.
Yeah, you're good. And that made an interesting point. I was going to mention this. Foods is one of those things that can be organized a little bit differently depending on where you go. So sometimes they break it out into classes. So you're just judging an entire class of cookies, an entire class of quick breads, and they might do that in open class. Where 4-H, you're judging juniors, which is an age group, and intermediates, and all the exhibit items are into one. So, you know, if it goes the other way and you're judging cookies or quick breads and they want you to name a champion for each one, if there isn't something that is deserving of a champion, if you really don't feel like there is something outstanding on all standards, it's okay not to award it. And most places will tell you that. There are a few times where they say, no matter what, you know, we have a sponsor for this award, we got to give it out. Then you got to do what they tell you. But most cases, don't, you know, where it's quality if deserving on those types of awards. Another ribbon you might see in 4-H is the participation ribbon. Those are for exhibits that don't meet some type of, you know, requirement. So at the county level, we don't really DQ things, or if it is DQ'd, they still get a participation ribbon. And in many times, the participation ribbon is green. I've seen most cases. It's also used for clover buds a lot of times. Clover buds are not of the age to join 4-H, and therefore it's not appropriate for them to be competitive yet at ages 5 and 6. And so we give Clover buds a participation ribbon. Sometimes it's a rainbow ribbon for kids that age, but they'll usually have a designated participation ribbon where you judge. So it's good to ask about those as well when you arrive. Champions. So again, this is kind of one of those things that varies from site to site, but typically you'll have a reserve champion and a champion within each age division or maybe within each class. And then you'll have overall reserve, grand, and grand champions. So let's, for example, you have a reserve champion and a champion junior foods. So all the young people 7 to 9, you need to name a reserve champion and a champion. You do the same thing for the intermediate level. You do this, same thing for senior level. Then in all of foods, we're taking away the ages, and then we give this overall reserve grand champion or grand champion. And usually those are our big rosettes, the purple and the lavender or light purple, whatever you want to call it. Special awards. Again, this is something that varies from site to site. Almost every county fair has some kind of specialty award. They should obviously tell you what those are. There's no way of knowing that. But the fair book should spell it out about what those are and how those are awarded. Again, the superintendent should be able to tell you about that and give you guidance. Again, it's kind of one of those things, same as champions, you know, only the exhibits that are deserving, that are at that level of quality should merit the award. So Nancy or Linda or Karen, do you guys have an example of maybe a special award that your units have used?
I know in one fair that I've been at, or actually a couple of them, they do what's called spotlight awards. So it may not be something that you would give a top grand champion or reserve to, but it may be something like best decorated pie or best best use of some kind of special ingredient or something like that. So those little spotlight awards kind of just highlight something kind of unique about that particular project and gives some attention to that and draws, you know, the visitor's eye to that project so that they look at it and say, well, that's cool. I never heard of that before. So that's one thing I can think of.
Yeah, we do several different special awards for, you know, we have like a pie contest that the person who sponsors it changes the type each year, you know, or we have a whole wheat bread product that has a special monies attached to it, you know, that can be variety. And then we also do like an overall, so they pick from all the grands, any age level can be the best overall product. So then that's one that's the judges decide on that as a collective, you know, kind of thing together. So that is something that does happen sometimes too, is there may be ones where you have to confer with other foods judges that are judging that day to make a selection. I know there's a couple of fairs I judge that have that kind of thing that we have to decide on a grand champion overall between all different age divisions or things we've judged.
Yeah, I agree with all that. Yeah, there are some fairs that ask the Kansas Wheat Commission to sponsor a bread award. I know that King Arthur Flour offers a special, they have an award program for fairs to use. I think a lot of times that's usually more of a special baking contest. I've done that. I know over in Dickinson County, they've done that before. They just have a specific item that's the only thing it's judged. It's a like cinnamon rolls, for example, and then it's sponsored by King Arthur Flour, and then the top ones get a special award from them. So that's kind of unique to something like that.
Yeah, I remember did you say Red Star Yeast? Like they would send aprons or they would send measuring cups as prizes.
Yeah.
And we had to,
Yeah.
those in the
That-
yeast bread categories.
Yeah. And I will say on this topic itself, in the food preservation side, that the Ball Company used to sponsor awards, but they do not do that anymore. So, but that is something in the past that they have done.
Thank you, Nancy and Karen. Let's see. I want to make sure we go back to the chat box if there's anything that we can go back and clarify, or if there are questions that we need to address for the good of the group.
Well, there's been a couple questions about the standards, and I will be talking about the scorecards that we have, where we mainly use them at the state fair, but they can absolutely be used at the county level. They're there for any fair to be used. So I will be talking about those more in the next 2 sessions. So stay tuned for that, and please come back for that. Let's see here. And the scorecards, they do show, okay, here's what we're looking for. And especially I really get kind of specific on the food preservation side of things. And we've got scorecards for specific categories in that area, because there's so many differences on that. We only have one scorecard for the foods division. It's kind of hard to make one scorecard for everything. And the question I've had is, should I have different scorecards for everything? Well, that's probably possible, but getting that put together will be quite a challenge, because there's so many different things out there these days. But I'm open for suggestions on that, that's for sure.
Now, when you are hired to be a foods judge, when they send you the packet of information, I'm just looking at a couple of these questions in the chat box. They should send you ahead of time, or you can request and ask for a copy of the score sheet that they will be using.
Yes.
We have a website. It's not password protected. I mean, it's a little bit varied. You kind of need to know where to look. There are a couple different versions of scorecards for food items, and counties use one over another for various reasons. So at each site, I think it's fair to ask, if they don't provide you with a copy of it, to ask, can I see what score sheet, what standards you're using, so that I can be prepared. A lot of them will use the same one that we use at the state fair. Again, it just provides a consistent experience. Those young people that go on from the county to the state, they already know what to expect and what they'll be evaluated on. But there are some locations that use some older ones that are still floating around out there. So feel free to ask them if they don't provide that to you.
So Amy, just to confirm, would that be for every project excluding livestock and not just food, to ask the local agent or 4-H coordinator?
Yes, absolutely. There are score sheets and standards for every project area in Kansas 4-H. I will say, there are still a few locations that don't use consultative judging, or may not be in the habit of using a written score sheet with standards. That is a part of our new agent training, that it's a large effort to get consistency across the state. So there probably is a handful of units that aren't in the habit of using them, but I certainly think it might drive home the point if you ask or inquire about them to do so. It's just a really important teaching tool for the young person to use that score sheet. It takes a little more time, I will say that. So, if you're if you're judging a county that has a large population or a really large 4-H program, and foods happens to be a really popular project, they might need to hire more judges if you're writing comments, or they maybe need more superintendents or helpers to make that process faster. But that's not your responsibility as a judge, right? Our job is to provide to set up the experience for a successful educational opportunity for the young person. And with that comes the score sheet. So if they're not using it, you certainly can ask.
Yeah, and I put a link in the chat box of many of the projects that have score sheets made for them. So it's on our state fair page on the 4-H Kansas 4-H website. But again, these are not just for the state fair. You guys can use these at the county level and use them as an educational tool, especially you 4-H leaders. Use these as an educational tool now to help kids understand, okay, this is kind of what these are the things we're looking for here. So, and another thing I would suggest, I know several of you said you've never done this before. A good thing to do is to volunteer to be a helper at your local fair or at a neighboring county, and get some experience that way by listening to somebody who does judge. It's a great way to really get a good picture of what to look for. Even at the state fair level, I know Amy, she's always looking for volunteers. And in any project, reach out to us and say, hey, I want to learn more about this before I really start doing it. And we're glad to have you.
Yeah, well said. I'm looking at the chat box and it doesn't appear that we have more at this time. With that, I'd like to remind everyone of the next 2 webinars coming up a week from tonight and then the following week after that. So next week we'll focus on food items, the basics of judging, and Karen's going to lead the way on that one. The week after that, we'll focus on foods preservation. We know from the first round of these that you'll have lots of questions and it's very interactive. We are going to do our best again with Nancy and Ashley and Linda and myself monitoring the chat box. We're going to try to keep up with the questions as they come in. These lasted a long time. They went late into the evening a couple years ago when we offered these for the first time. So we are going to cap it at probably 2 hours. And then we'll provide you with an opportunity to submit. Yeah, to submit follow-up questions. If you have questions that we didn't get to or weren't addressed in the chat box, we're going to provide you with a link to submit additional questions. That then we've got all your email addresses, and we don't want to leave any question unanswered, but we also don't want to make this thing last till midnight. So
for those of you
recorded as well.
Right. Yeah, we did this 3 years ago, and we were all very new to Zoom at that time. And the sessions, especially the next 2 sessions, they lasted a good 3 hours. And an hour of that was just question and answers. So we're going to try to do our best, like Amy said, to kind of control that as much as we can. We do want your questions, so please don't be afraid to ask. But come and hang on for the ride, because there's going to be a lot of stuff I'm going to throw at you all. So, because there is a lot to cover. And I will make it some interactive parts of this so that you can participate. And I hope you learn some things. And I do want to ask, I did get, I had an extension professional from Rutgers University reach out to me about joining these sessions. I'm wondering if they're here. Rutgers, if you don't know, is in New Jersey. And I thought it was so cool. They saw our information somewhere on Facebook or something. I was just curious if anybody from New Jersey here tonight? Go ahead and unmute if you're here. I'm just curious. Maybe not. That's okay. Maybe they'll join the next couple sessions. We'll check, but I thought that was cool. So
yeah, I did too. I just saw a question come in, and I'll take a second to answer it. It's a really great question, and something that I think we've all seen at one point or another. The question is, when is it appropriate to give a lower ribbon? Because maybe you've got a senior 4-H'er, so someone that's in, high school, and they're bringing an item that is well beneath their skill level or their experience level. It's just not age appropriate, like a no bake, which is a good example. I think it's totally acceptable. If it's a good no bake and it meets the standards, but yet this is a sophomore, junior, senior, or they've been in the project for several years, and that based on your conversation with them, you can tell that they are well above that skill level. I think it's totally appropriate to give them a red and then justify it in your comments and give them that feedback. Say, these are perfectly good no-bake cookies, except that I know that you're capable of doing more advanced skills. I want to see you try something to challenge yourself at your age and in your abilities. So next year, I'd like to see you try, and whatever that might be that you would suggest. But I think that's totally appropriate. Again, it's encouraging our young people to have that growth mindset, to put them on that trajectory that they're continuously challenging themselves to master new skills.
Yeah, and Catherine has a follow-up comment on that too, where that same age level, but they've only been baking for a couple years. So absolutely, you judge them on that skill level. And that's where you learn that in the conversations that you have with them. And Kelly's asking about how you handle 4-Hers with disabilities. Amy, you might be able to help with this. I have judged a couple, I know of a few that has some disabilities. Usually the parents are with them on that, but if they can talk, it depends on their abilities, on how they can interact with you, as far as how much you're going to be able to learn from them. Sometimes the parents do have to fill in. So Amy, do you have any other suggestions on that?
Yeah, I would just say we as a system, so K-State Research and Extension and Kansas 4-H is trying to do a much better job of encouraging parents and young people to ask for accommodations so that we can better, do a better job of providing an educational experience for each young person. So, sometimes a young person needs an accommodation that you can't see visually based on an appearance or outwardly. There isn't an official accommodations request process. We're training our staff to better understand the process and what that looks like. If we know ahead of time that a young person either has some type of learning disability, physical, verbal, hearing impaired, we can certainly work. The agent would then be equipped to create and notify the judge and the superintendent ahead of time what those accommodations within reason, what that process might look like. So we've recently, worked with vision impaired families. So we've had interpreters, we've had sign language interpreters, even if it's just like a delayed learning, again, you're judging against a standard, but you're also judging on that young person's abilities. So even if the score sheet or the entry card says he's 17, but if you know ahead of time that young person is functioning or learning at grade 6, then you're evaluating it based on their abilities at grade 6. So, it certainly helps when you know those things ahead of time. Not all families will request accommodations, and that's okay too. But, you do what you can with what you know and try to assess just based on that young person, what their abilities are. So that's probably a very long-winded answer to a rather complex issue, but we are trying to do better about that. And when we know, we can do better also. Other questions that I might have missed? Yeah, Catherine, that's a great comment. You know, if you've got a junior or senior in high school, but they just joined 4-H or they just tried foods for the first or second time, it's totally appropriate that they would start at a more basic level. We're not going to, expect a brand new foods member to right out of the gates do a complex yeast spread or a lattice pie. They're going to start it at something more appropriate based on their skill and experience. So yeah, you kind of have to gauge that based on the conversation you have with them. Any other questions before we wrap up for the evening? Okay. Well, we will send out another email a day or two before April 18th, reminding you of that webinar and with the link to the Zoom. I think, okay, I was just checking the chat one more time. It was flashing at me. Okay. Karen, Nancy,
Yep.
Ashley, Linda, do you guys have anything you want to add before we wrap up for the evening?
I think we're good.
Okay.
Appreciate y'all coming tonight.
Yes, thank you so much. We appreciate everything you do. All right, we'll see you in another week. Have a good evening.
Thank you.